Well, thank you very much, Michael, MLA Shao, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here this evening, and we very much appreciate the province of Alberta's support. Distinguished guests all, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a great honor to have this opportunity to recognize a person that has done so much and frankly continues to do so much to improve the economy, our workplaces, our environment here in the province of Alberta. The Alberta Congress Board's Distinguished Workplace Leader Award was established to recognize the work of individuals, people who have dedicated themselves to improving Alberta's workplaces through their vision, their action, to ultimately benefit communities, workers, employers, and stakeholders. Their work is recognized as making a difference in the quality of life of Albertans through their contributions of their precious time, energy, and most importantly, their compelling vision for this province. This year's award recipient, the Honourable McLellan, is being recognized as one of those phenomenal Albertans who continues to bring the very best of what she can offer, building a strong and prosperous province for the benefit of all Albertans. This evening is for you, Anne, and we want to tell everyone here, before I make the presentation, a little bit more about you and what you've accomplished over the past few years. The Honourable Anne McLellan, PC, joined Bennett Jones LLP in its Edmonton office on July 4th, 2006. Ms. McLellan, I'm going to call you Anne, provides strategic advice to the firm and to its clients. On May 12th, 2006, she was appointed Distinguished Scholar in Residence at the University of Alberta in the newly established Institute for United States Policy Studies. She serves on the board of directors of Nexen, an independent, Canadian-owned and based global energy company, Agrium, a global producer and marketer of agricultural nutrients and industrial products, and major retail supplier of agricultural products and services. Cameco, the world's largest uranium producer, and the Edmonton Regional Airport Authority, which is a financially independent, non-share corporation charged with managing the four airports in the Edmonton region. Among her many community commitments, she sits on the board of the Royal Alexandra Hospital Charitable Foundation, the Community Outreach Committee for the Lois Hole Hospital for Women, the National Strategy Council for the Mazankowski Alberta Heart Institute, and as chair of the Friends of the Legal Resource Centre, which is an organization that promotes access to justice. Anne served 4 terms as the Liberal Member of Parliament for Edmonton Centre from October 1993 to January 2006. She served as Deputy Prime Minister of Canada and as the first Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness in the government of the Right Honourable Paul Martin, and also served during her time in office as Minister of Health, Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, and Minister of Natural Resources and Federal Interlocutor for Métis and Non-Status Indians. I don't think there are any other ministries left, Anne, but certainly I'm sure if there were, you probably would have continued to serve on them. It was back in 1980 that Anne came to God's country and was appointed Associate Professor of Law at the University of Alberta. She served as an Associate Dean of the Faculty of Law from 1985 to 1987 and as Acting Dean from July 1991 to June of 1992. Anne has a stellar record of contribution to important community institutions. She served on the board of directors of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, Alberta Legal Aid, and Vice President of the University of Calgary's Faculty Association, just to name but a few. She holds a Bachelor of Arts and a law degree from Dalhousie University and a Master's of Law degree from King's College, University of London. As Mayor of Calgary during Anne's time in office, I can attest to the fact that while she may have technically represented Edmonton Centre, we all felt that Anne represented certainly Calgary, but I think all of Alberta. Coming from a city with, at the time, no representation in the government at that, I, along with I think quite a few other Calgarians, shamelessly laid claim to Anne McLellan as my and certainly Calgary's representative in the federal government. She was more than a friend. She was just a tireless worker for us all and a great supporter and booster for Alberta, and a tremendous advocate for issues that were important to Alberta, from funding for major infrastructure. Anne was instrumental when we were working at the time to develop the National Infrastructure Program for urban centres across the country, to critical research and development, providing and advocating for and delivering significant R&D dollars to Alberta institutions, to fighting for the accelerated capital cost allowance that enabled the oil sands development that we see today to occur. I believe very strongly that Anne can legitimately lay claim to being an integral part of the diversification and the strengthening of the Alberta economy as essentially the strongest economy in this country. The Alberta workforce, in my opinion, owes Anne McLellan a huge debt of gratitude. Before we call Anne up, I would like us all to take a few minutes and watch a short presentation. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, in a few pictures that could say much more than I could possibly say this evening. Why we are recognizing our distinguished workplace leader award this evening. So Anne, in recognition of your outstanding contribution to Alberta's workplace and your leadership in engaging stakeholder groups to bring about meaningful and progressive change to the benefit of all Albertans, I'm pleased to present you with the 2008 Distinguished Workplace Leader Award. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please help me bring forward Anne McLellan, our 2008 Distinguished Leader Award winner.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that very wonderful introduction, Al, and thank everybody who worked so hard on that video. Let me say, some of those pictures I haven't seen in a very long time, and all those pictures bring back, Al's a lot taller than me, all those pictures bring back amazing memories of my time in political life here in the province of Alberta and in this blessed country of ours. And as you can see from the pictures, just as your theme for this conference is diversity, much of what one does as a politician in public life is interact with that diversity in a very real and concrete way every day. Because, of course, our country is one of the most diverse on earth. And David is starting out his political career and represents that diversity of our great country, but will also work with people, as I did throughout my political career, who come from diverse backgrounds, who have diverse skills, attributes, in some cases even aspirations. But in the context of that diversity, all, I think, share one common goal for themselves, their families, their communities, and their countries, that they are able to live their lives and achieve to the full extent of their potential. So I do want to thank the Alberta Congress Board again for acknowledging or giving me this award this evening. Let me say it is a very humbling experience because I know some of the people who have won this award before, and 2 years ago I had the honor of being here. I was invited to come and speak on the topic of leadership in a globalized world, and the person who won this leadership award 2 years ago was a dear friend of mine, Jim Carter, who many of you know, who was so integral to the success of Syncrude and everything Syncrude achieved, not only as an employer, but an important part of our community and our province. So to be considered to be in any way in the same league as people like Jim Carter is, for me, a very humbling and special honor. Let me say as well that I think it's fair to say that the Congress Board is a very special organization. You're celebrating your 34th anniversary this year. It's, I think, a tribute to an organization that understood long before I think most others did, either here or in our country, or probably even in other parts of the world, that what is so important in the long term to people's quality of life is to bring people together with diverse, that word keeps coming up, with diverse points of view and backgrounds, and put them in a setting where they can share, where things are off the record, and where people can put their perspectives on the table, their challenges, what they see as opportunities, their aspirations for their organizations, their constituents, the people they serve as public servants, whatever the case may be. And I think the Alberta Congress Board has been well ahead of its time in understanding the importance of putting people in those kinds of circumstances and letting them talk through key issues. And if any of you have looked at and I know some of you in this room have participated in almost every of those 34 gatherings, but if you look at those 34 years and the kinds of topics that this organization has addressed, They are really all the important and challenging issues that this province and our country have faced over those 34 years, whether it's workplace issues, whether it's social issues around health, education, whether it's fiscal issues. I was struck by the fact that one year you dealt with the topic, I think, of whether tax was actually still needed. It's a very interesting one for those of us in government, right, David? But there's no question that this organization has been on the cutting edge, and it's not only the topics you address, but it's also, as I've mentioned, the way in which you do it, bringing people together. And I guess one of the things I learned in government is that the more you're able to bring people together and put all the people in the room around the table who share an interest in an issue, the more likely it is you get sustainable results that actually deal with the problem or achieve the outcome we're all seeking, and also provide for the broadest possible societal or stakeholder buy-in. And I think that's what you're doing here, and I think it's important, and I think you need to continue doing it, because we need more of this, and we need more of this even within our levels of government, as well as organizations like this, which are obviously nonpartisan, but able to bring people together from a diversity of backgrounds. So I do want to congratulate you for what you're doing here, and I think, again, another example of how people in this province are risk takers, because there is risk involved in all of you coming here and sharing, especially in the workshops. And I've heard that sometimes the workshops get very heated, and there are strong points of view expressed, but everybody's there in a constructive way to help fashion outcomes, not only to talk, but to deal with concrete problems in concrete ways and put together implementation plans as a way forward. So I just want to say that I think as a model, the Alberta Congress Board and everybody who's been involved with it over the years is to be congratulated. Now, my former student, Mark Asbell, is here tonight. Many of you know Mark. Mark mischievously but totally accurately said, when I told him earlier today they've given me 10 minutes, Mark's response to that was, "Ann, you've never done anything in 10 minutes. I think I've probably taken up my 10 minutes, so I apologize, but there are just a few other things that I would like to say on this theme of diversity. And first of all, before I make perhaps a few more serious comments, over this past little while, as I was thinking about the theme of this conference, diversity, you know how sometimes you see things, it may be a billboard or you may hear something on the radio, and you think to yourself, that's almost, some kind of karma. I'm not a Zen person or anything, but sometimes you think, gosh, that's interesting because it's related to something I've been thinking about, and in this case, diversity. And the other day, just 2 days ago, I was driving in the west end of Edmonton, and I don't know whether any of the rest of you have seen this, but it's a great big billboard put up by the United Way of Edmonton. And, it's a picture of Jim Gurnett, and some of you here know who Jim is. He heads the Mennonite Center for Newcomers, if you're talking about diversity. And Jim is holding a beautiful, young, probably 3-4 child, obviously a child, the daughter of one of our new African-Canadian immigrants to the city of Edmonton. And the caption on that billboard said, and this was Jim's these were Jim's words, it's vital, it was diversity, it's vital to us all. And I thought, how interesting that I would see that billboard, brand new billboard in the West End, diversity, it's vital to us all. And one of the other things I've noticed recently, and I don't know about you where all of you live, but I go to the Safeway in the area in which I live. I go to the local Sobeys, it's called Urban Fresh or something downtown, Home Depot in the West End. And you know what I've noticed? And maybe it's just me, but I don't think so. What I've noticed is a number of employees working in these establishments who are people of color, many of them new African Canadian immigrants, Aboriginal Canadians, or Canadians with disabilities. I've noticed a real difference lately, and that's wonderful. That's great. I think it's probably sad in some respects that it's taken the present labor shortage to have employers reach out to those people and see their worth and include them in their workforce profile. But lately, I've just noticed so many, especially young African Canadian and Aboriginal women working in these establishments. And I have been consciously thinking about the fact that we actually are starting to see some real diversity in our workforce. And the other thing that came across my desk this week as I was thinking about diversity, whether one survives or thrives with it or without it, was a magazine that I read that deals with corporate social responsibility called Corporate Nights. Some of you may receive it or read it. And in fact, this October edition has a big section on diversity in the workplace and what companies, what employers need to do to ensure that they are inclusive places of work and that they are reaching out to people who perhaps have not been fully included in our workforce or, dare I say, even our society in the past. So those were those small little things that just came across my desk or my line of vision over the past few days, actually. And I thought to myself that it is so timely that the Alberta Congress is dealing with this topic of diversity. And there are reasons why it is timely. I've already alluded to one. Ours is the most diverse, or one of the most diverse nations on earth. We are the only nation that entrenches the, I don't say right of multiculturalism, there's no right to multiculturalism, but in fact evokes the principle of multiculturalism in our Constitution. So how do we take this reality of diversity in our country and turn it into an opportunity and an advantage for all of us who live here? And I know that that was some of what people were discussing today. I also believe that a key reason to act on our diversity is the moral imperative. Here I'm speaking obviously for myself. It is the moral imperative that as a society we want everyone to have the opportunity to maximize his or her potential. And we know that there are also demographic and economic imperatives that lead us to focus on diversity at this time. We know that we will not be able to sustain and enhance our quality of life if we do not provide the means for all Canadians to utilize their creativity, their knowledge, their skills, and dare I say, their passion. Now, it's possible for someone like myself to approach the subject of diversity from a number, I suppose, of different access points. Obviously, I guess I could suggest that I am an example of successful diversity. When I went to university, dare I say, in the late 60s, and to law school in 1971, there were not many women. And in fact, the topic du jour, if you like, was around gender diversity. This was about the feminist movement. It was about gender equality. It was about creating diverse spaces. And in the late 60s and early 70s, it wasn't really so much about the workforce, although that was an issue. It was about diversity in educational spaces, so that actually women would go to university in significant numbers, go to professional schools and elsewhere in significant numbers, so that one could actually get to that step of having gender diversity in the workforce. And you know, it wasn't that long ago. There are days I feel old, but it wasn't that long ago. That was 40 years, less than 40 years ago. And I think we have, as it relates to gender diversity, my story and the story of many women here and others, that we have come a long way, as the ad said, or says, over these past 40 years as it relates to gender diversity. I used to be the only woman in certain places. I was the only woman teaching at UNB Law School in 1976. I was the first tenure-track female professor in the history of that institution. I was all alone there. I used to go to meetings of the New Brunswick Law Society on behalf of the faculty. I was invariably the only woman in those rooms. But then, by the 80s, that started to change. In the mid-80s, there were more of us in law schools, teaching, in a practicing profession, in positions of some authority and influence in law societies and so on, and legal aid societies and other things. So by the end of the 80s, I was hardly ever alone. And then I entered federal politics. And Mr. Chrétien, for whatever reason, and I thank him enormously in retrospect, made me Minister of Natural Resources. And you know what I noticed? I started to walk into rooms where I was the only woman, all over again. Because as Minister of Natural Resources, you're dealing with some of the sectors I have come to love, and in fact I sit on the boards of a number of companies in these sectors, but you're dealing with the extractive industries, as we call them, mining, oil, gas. You're dealing with forestry. You're dealing with the nuclear industry. You're dealing with renewables, and so on. And in fact, most meetings I went to throughout my tenure as Minister of Natural Resources were populated by men. And, you know, in '93, when I started to see this phenomenon again, it was a shock to me because I thought I'd left that behind. I thought that we had a diverse workforce and diverse spaces, and therefore I was surprised when I realized I was once again the only woman in a lot of those rooms. But that has changed too, I'm glad to say. There are still way too few women in so-called non-traditional industries, but there are more, and that's all to the good. Then I left politics in '06, and part of what I'm doing now is serving on a number of corporate boards. And what I noticed in relation to at least one of those boards when I walked in the room was that I'm the only woman again. You know? And I thought, I'd left that behind. But as we know, and each one of these topics, by the way, someone could talk for days on, and there's so much written and researched about these topics, women in terms of these workplaces and spaces and the systemic barriers that still exist and so on. But what I'm sharing with you is just a brief little insight, I suppose, into my diversity, my reality. And I'm not complaining because I have lived an enormously blessed life, and I was lucky enough to go to university when the feminist movement had momentum behind it, and when the world was changing, and when gender equality and gender diversity were issues that were front and center virtually everywhere in the developed world. But I noticed that I walk into a boardroom and I'm the only woman. I don't see many women chairs of corporate boards. There are not many women CEOs, certainly not in the extractive industries or the natural resource sectors. And there are reasons for this, by the way. But only to say that at various times in my life, I've been pushed back, not me personally, to realize that, in fact, as much as we've accomplished as it relates to gender diversity, there are still lots of places where we actually don't have much gender diversity, and we need to think about that just as we do other aspects of diversity. And let me say that, excuse me, recently I've spent a lot of time thinking, excuse me, and talking and doing some cross-country consultations about why we don't have more women in politics, because we don't have nearly enough gender diversity in politics. But I have now spun, thank you, Al. I have now spun off from that to look at the subject of why we don't have more gender diversity, in quotes, in major law firms. I am counsel in one. And you know, the issues have changed. It's now not about diversity in terms of entrance level. No one is suggesting that women are not hired in large numbers by major law firms in this country. Absolutely not, or actually other corporations. The issue we now have to focus on is a different dimension of diversity. We're in the door. It's, for example, in major Canadian law firms, how we keep women, how we retain them when they're getting ready to be considered for partner, and that coincides with wanting to have a family, and the whole work-life balance equation, which so many of us are talking about and see around us with younger women and men. So that's what I've been spending some time working on, and I think those retention issues to keep a diverse workforce in the longer term, I think, are important issues, just as issues around original access to workplaces is still important. Now, I'm not saying that women have achieved, as it relates to access to the workplace, everything we need to, but let me just give you a couple of other examples of parts of my life where I think some good things are happening for Aboriginal Canadians. And Aboriginal Canadians have to be a key part of the Canadian workforce as we go forward. And we all know why that is the case. They are an untapped resource in this country. And I think it's great that there are so many of my friends from the Métis settlements here this evening hosting this dinner, and that there are undoubtedly other representatives from First Nations communities I haven't had the opportunity to say hello to this evening. But Aboriginal Canadians are the fastest growing part of our population. They are an important part of us being able to sustain our quality of life and prosper in the future. It is absolutely key for them, for First Nations and more generally Aboriginal Canadians, to succeed, to have opportunities to build strong and prosperous communities, and it's absolutely essential to the well-being of our whole country. And I happen to work, well, I'm on the boards of two companies who actually live the talk. And that doesn't mean we've done nearly enough, and we would never say we have, because this is an ongoing challenge of diversity. But for example, I'll just give you one example because I'm well over my 10 minutes now. I sit on the board of Cameco, and Cameco is the world's largest producer of uranium, and I know that some people are not happy about that, but I do believe that nuclear is one of the energy sources of the future, the present and the future. But we mine primarily in northern Saskatchewan, and the workforce in northern Saskatchewan is primarily Aboriginal. And Cameco made a commitment to the province of Saskatchewan that 60% of our workforce would come from northern Saskatchewan. So 60% of northern Saskatchewan workforce, the vast majority of that workforce, the people who live in the north where we mine, are First Nations or Métis Saskatchewanians. And what Cameco has done is what companies are doing now, I believe, all over this country, and certainly in the extractive industries, mining, oil and gas, forestry, and so on. We know, your title of your conference, it interests me, the diversity imperative, survive or thrive. I looked at this a long time because it seems to me that you're suggesting that the possibility is one of mere survival or thriving. Well, I'm here to tell you that a company like Cameco doesn't survive. It's not about mere survival. We don't survive if we don't get the diversity equation right. if we don't understand that as a company extracting resources in the northern Saskatchewan, we do not work with First Nations and Métis communities, that we do not understand their challenges and their aspirations, that we do not help them build schools that look like ours with laboratories that teach science, health centers that deliver a semblance of big city health care, that we do not help them get the education they need, that we do not pigeonhole them into being tradespeople all the time, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you know what? Aboriginal people can be skilled tradespeople. They can be outstanding entrepreneurs who run their own businesses and provide supplies and services to companies like Cameco. And it is our responsibility as a company that wants to do business in northern Saskatchewan to understand that unless we get that right, unless we walk the talk every day, it's not survive or thrive, we don't exist. So, let me say, and I am passionate about that, because in case you didn't notice, because, you know, sometimes we can talk a lot about diversity, and gosh knows, a lot has been written, a lot has been talked about for years and years, whether it's ethnic diversity, gender diversity, linguistic diversity, religious diversity. Diversity has many important aspects and attributes and characteristics. But what all of us understand and can talk about the best is what we live. And I have been so struck. And there can be cynical people, and there are probably some here who say, well, Cameco's just doing what it needs to do to be able to take that uranium out of the ground in northern Saskatchewan. Sure, there's an economic imperative, but also I'm here to tell you that if it's only an economic imperative, we won't survive. It is actually companies understanding that diverse workforces add value, that you have a moral obligation where you do business to understand the population, to understand their needs and aspirations, and to include them in your success and your aspirations. It goes beyond simply an economic imperative. For companies who live this, for companies who understand diversity is a transcendent value that can, in fact, ensure not only that you survive, but yet that you thrive. But I also believe that for companies who don't live that, I don't think they will survive in the world in which we live. They will struggle along for a period of time, and then whether it's because they don't live the values of corporate social responsibility, or they're shunned by unions, or they're shunned by First Nations, or whatever the case may be, if they're not walking the walk in their gut and heart every day, they won't survive. And that's why what you're talking about here is so important. And that's why I did want to share with you my actual pride in a company like Cameco. It doesn't mean we're perfect. One thing we did recently, we just hired a brand new position in our company, Vice President, Community Development and Social Responsibility. And who we hired to fill that position is someone from one of the First Nations, Gary Morasti, former MP, former chief from his community in northern Saskatchewan. We felt it was really important, if we were going to get this part right for all of us going forward, including the First Nations and the Métis, we needed someone of the place, someone who understood both the aspirations and challenges of northern Saskatchewanians and the aspirations and challenges of our company. And to me, that is a small part of walking the walk and getting this piece around diversity, and diversity is one part of corporate social responsibility, right. And I could give you other examples, but I won't, because I know that time is very quickly moving on. But just let me say that, as I mentioned, diversity has many aspects to it. I've talked about gender diversity. I've talked about the diversity that many companies in Canada today are attempting to achieve in partnership, building strong relationships with our Canada's First Nations peoples and our Métis peoples. Obviously, new Canadians, people who come here and choose to live in this country, also have huge challenges around inclusion, as David mentioned, the inclusive workplace, because this is very much a two-way street. And I think that what's important here, again, is to focus on how we create these inclusive communities, these inclusive workplaces. And I actually do believe, as it relates to new Canadians, governments have a very important responsibility here. And let me assure you that governments, the ones I have been a part of, and Prime Minister Harper's government, and Premier Stelmach's government, we struggle, and mayors of communities and cities, we struggle with how we get this piece right. Because we talk about diversity, as I've said, all the time we talk about it. And we just all assume, as we should, that this is an important part of life in this diverse country, that we need these people in our places of employment and in our institutions of influence, be it Parliament or else, legislatures or elsewhere. But what is the plan? What is the work plan, if you like? You people are working on work plans. What is the work plan forward to make sure that we get beyond the talk and we actually embed the commitment to diversity and the reality of diversity in wherever we find ourselves in our daily lives? And here the focus is clearly on our workspaces. And I would say that governments, it's not that we're stupid, by the way. You know, we actually know how important this is. And we know what the challenges are. But I have got to tell you, it is not easy to get this piece right. What are the plans, the programs, the policies that help new Canadians integrate quickly, that make the transition from where they were to where they are and ultimately to where they want to be? And it's not just about financial resources. Of course, governments could spend more on ESL and other kinds of adjustment programs that people like Jim Gurnett and the Mennonite Centre and many others run all over our province. Yes, we could as governments, David, yours and mine before, and we could spend more. We could spend more. But it's not only about that. It's, I think, about how we actually, culturally, those of us who aren't new, how we take the talents and skills and the reality of new Canadians and their diversity and make this part of who we are. So they are not the other, but they are part of who we are. And that means that just as new Canadians have to adjust to a new culture, I think if we are going to get this diversity piece right, we have to adjust to a new culture. And I think that's part of what you've been talking about here. And cultural change and transition is never easy. And it's not something you snap your fingers at and achieve. It's not something, as I say, you just throw more financial resources at and achieve. But I do think that governments must play an important leadership role in ensuring that new Canadians have the opportunity to achieve and live whatever their dream is here, and that just as importantly, all of us get the opportunity to share in that dream. And in fact, together, we build a new dream. And there are lots of barriers and problems to that. But I believe government must play a leadership role, industry must play a leadership role, labor unions must play a leadership role, nonprofit organizations, our schools, our healthcare institutions, we all have to play an important role in making sure we get this piece right. Because if we don't, the title of your conference is probably right. Only I would say there's no option of just status quo, flatline, survival. The options are that we either thrive if we get this piece right, or in fact, we fall behind the rest of the world who understands the piece and gets the piece right. It would be a tragedy, ladies and gentlemen, if in this country, the most diverse in the world, we, all of us, were not able to come together to plot the course, to design the programs, to put in place the policies, expend the resources, and have the generosity of spirit that it will take to ensure that diversity is not something we just talk about, but it is something that we live every day, and that it is not only the new Canadian, the woman, the disabled, who we focus on as that diverse element in our workplace, but that in fact, all of us, whoever we are, whatever our background, we come to realize that diversity is about all of us. And if we want to create truly diverse, inclusive places, it will take us all, and it will be a cultural change for all of us. But ladies and gentlemen, I have to believe we're up to it, and it's worth it. Thank you very much.